season starts here, the Vancouver Boat Show.
Okay, welcome to the Vancouver International Boat Show virtual seminar series, sponsored by Freedom Marine International Yacht Sales, the premier choice for exploring the passion of yachting. Thank you for joining us. The seminar will begin in 1 moment. If you are having technical difficulties, you can reach me, the online moderator, via the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Questions for our speaker can be added in the Q&A box, also at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered after the slide presentation. And it is our pleasure to present Staying Safe on the Water, Lessons Learned with Boudewijn Neijens. Over to you.
Thanks, Maureen, and welcome everybody. Indeed, I am Boudewijn Neijens. I'm with RCMSAR. I've been with RCMSAR for over 10 years now, and I am a coxswain at Station 1, which is in Horseshoe Bay, close to Vancouver. So today, what we're going to do is talk a bit about RCMSAR and then what we run into on the water and what we learn from what we see on the water, and hopefully there's some lessons for you in that too. So RCMSAR, who are we? We're obviously a volunteer organization, about 1,000 members around the province of BC, 32 rescue stations at this point in time. And our mission is very simple. It's to save lives on the water. We were formerly known as the Coast Guard Auxiliary. We rebranded about 8 years ago, but actually we've been in business, if you wish, for over 40 years. And we are partly funded by Coast Guard, but actually largely funded by donors like yourselves. So at the end, we'll talk about that. Of course, I can't avoid talking about donations. The volunteer model in marine rescue is actually quite common. Here in Canada, in a way, we're a bit of the exception, if you wish, because we have this dual system where we have a federal agency, Coast Guard, and we have a volunteer system like ourselves. But if you look in many other developed countries, it's actually primarily, if not 100% volunteer. Here are a few examples. You see here Australia, South Africa, France, Germany, the UK, Iceland, many of the Scandinavian countries, Holland, which is where I come from. All these countries pretty much rely 100% on volunteer efforts for search and rescue. So the Canadian model is a bit exceptional, but it works. And we have, of course, a very, very good relationship with Coast Guard, and we work alongside them all the time. And here are our stations. You can see them across the province, all the way from, well, pretty much the far south, south that you can get, to as far north as you get along the coastline. So we're strategically located pretty much all along the coastline, and that allows us to respond very quickly because, generally speaking, the name of the game, of course, is to be there fast, especially in our cold waters. So today, what I want to do is talk about a few stories and a few lessons learned, as I said. This is not to scare you. This is just because, like in any activity, there's risk. And therefore, you better know how to manage those risks and enjoy your time on the water without having to pay the price for it. So with that, it's mostly a matter of basic precautions. So we'll talk about those a little bit. And the ultimate goal, of course, is to avoid us having to visit you. On the other hand, you're very welcome to visit us, as these young scouts are doing on a beautiful BC day. We actually welcome visitors to our stations quite regularly. If you want to talk about boating, learn more about what we do, absolutely feel free to come by, and we'll show you how we operate. So if I look back and if you just look at the statistics on what are the most common reasons for us to be called out for rescues, what you'll find is navigation errors, and then even worse maybe, or even more common, night navigation errors or navigation challenges, because night is very different, of course, as you can imagine. Maintenance issues and fuel issues or lack of fuel very often. And then maybe worst of all, just general unpreparedness or being impaired. So in other words, drunk driving, which happens on the water too. So we'll go over those 4, and then we'll finish off with a few tips on how to be prepared and to enjoy your time on the water. So navigation, I'm sure that many of you have seen images similar to this. Small little navigation error, and here you are on the dry. Now this is not very dramatic. This was literally just misreading the tide tables, and you just wait for a few hours and you're on your way again. And this boat sits nicely upright and it's sunny, so it's all good. Things can get a bit worse, of course, like in a sailboat, generally speaking, when you misread the tide tables, you wind up leaning over and it's not nearly as comfortable. And this poor fellow actually did that on New Year's Eve. And he had to wait until literally a few minutes before midnight and the new year to actually refloat. Otherwise, he would have been aground for 2 years in a row. That would have been interesting. Rocks are hard. This poor fellow actually drove straight into a rock, as you can see. And if you look carefully at the top windscreen here, there's actually the windscreen is missing because he actually flew through it. The impact was such that he actually flew through his windscreen. So it was neither very pleasant for the boat nor for the driver. So again, be careful. And then this poor fellow, again, misread the charts. There was a rock just under the waterline, and he opened his boat pretty much like a can opener, as you can see. And it took us quite a few pumps to keep that boat afloat. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. The insurers wrote it off, so that was $500,000 gone for one little navigation mistake, which the poor master driver could not understand. So navigation is all about charts. You need to, of course, have charts, electronic or otherwise, and you need to be able to read them. So our first example was very simple. That fellow was trying to get to this particular dock. But of course, as you can see, the green area is the area that dries out at low tide, and that's exactly what happened to him. So charts are important. Have them, know how to read them, because you need to know where safe water is. And it's especially important if you don't know the area. So in other words, local knowledge is best. If you know where you're going, if you know the hazards and the obstacles, then great. If you don't, consult your charts more often than not. And of course, remember that tides do change, especially here in BC. We have pretty impressive tides most of the time. So that's day navigation. And if you think of it, the charts, certainly on your plotter, but even on paper charts, you have different scales. And if I look at this particular chart, the grebe islets, which are top left there, look pretty innocent to me. Actually, I can barely see them. I can just see the name. But if I zoom in, yes, indeed, there is a few islets there. And I also see that there might be some trouble there. And if I zoom in again, I find there's quite a few rocks awash and quite a few shallow areas there that you really avoid around those islets. So make sure that you zoom in and make sure that you really know where you are, because we see a lot of errors because of this, basically just using charts at the wrong scale or at the wrong zoom factor, and you think you're in safe waters, but you're actually not. Night, of course, is even more complicated because it's dark out there, and it can be really, really dark at sea, as I'm sure many of you know if you have tried. And the usual references that we have on the road are, of course, not available to us. So it really becomes very confusing very quickly. And this is a little example. What do you see? Well, I see a lot of lights. I don't know which ones of these lights are actually on shore, which ones are on the water, although the greens and the reds are good telltales. But I really have a hard time possibly understanding all this. If it's a bit clearer, I might see a little bit more. But on our boats, on our rescue boats, we have this wonderful technology, which is night vision, and that allows me to illuminate the whole area. And this is what I actually see at that point in time. I see a whole bunch of different vessels. I see some marks, and I see lights that actually were on shore, but were confusing because I thought they were on vessels. So it can be very confusing. It can be actually very disorienting at night. So night is special, and a good example of that is a story which sadly some of you might have heard before, and that's a vessel that was called the Sun Boy. And this happened quite a while ago now, thankfully. That doesn't happen very often. This was a fireworks night. As you know, in Vancouver in the summer, we have fireworks a few evenings, and that attracts literally hundreds, if not thousands of boats if the weather is nice. And this was a bay liner in English Bay, of course, admiring the fireworks like everybody else. And at the end of the fireworks, they went home. And unfortunately, what they did is they ran in between a tug and its barge. And therefore, what they did was they actually ran over the cable that attaches the barge to the tug. The props and the rudder of the bay liner, of course, caught on the tow cable, stopped them dead in their tracks. Unfortunately, the barge does not stop. It has immense inertia, as you can imagine, and therefore they were ran over by the barge. And that was pretty sad because out of the 14 people on that vessel, only 9 survived. So in other words, 5 perished. So this is extreme, of course, but it does show you that at night, things can go very, very wrong, because this is what the driver of Sunboy was looking at. This is what he saw at night. He saw 2 green lights and these 3 white lights. And of course, the 2 green lights, if they were independent of each other, would be of no concern. But the 3 white lights should have been the tip that this was actually a tug pulling a barge or a tow of over 200 meters, so quite a distance. And indeed, if you try to drive in between these 2, that would be ending badly. So in other words, he was actually looking at this. And yes, he drove in between and he got caught. So the lessons there are clearly that nighttime is different because it's just much more challenging. So be prepared for nighttime if you go out at nighttime. Navigation skills, you really need to navigation skills. You need to understand where you are at all times. You need to be able to read your charts, and you have to really be on them, and ideally use radar. Know your collision regulations, because they will tell you what all these lights mean. The green lights, the red lights, the white lights, and there's many of them and the different configurations. You need to know your lights, as I just said. And ideally, of course, again, only go out if you have local knowledge. So in other words, go at night in areas that you know in daylight, because that makes it much easier, of course, to find your bearings and to know where the hidden dangers might be and which are the busy areas, etc. Maintenance is another big cause, as I said. Now, when you think maintenance, many of us will immediately jump to the conclusion, yeah, well, of course, you're looking at derelicts and boats that have passed their prime, like these 2 maybe. And yeah, sure, they create a large proportion of our problems because they are unreliable per definition, nearly. You could argue that most of the maintenance problems are preventable. Fuel problems are definitely preventable, but it can happen to anybody. I remember this good fellow who has a multi-million-dollar yacht. It looks pretty beautiful and pretty new, but it only takes one little hydraulic line to burst, and he lost steering. So he could not for the life of him get his boat back home, even on a calm day, as you can see here. And that was quite interesting, actually, with our little rescue boats to push that vessel back to its dock in a marina. That was quite the challenge. That was a good training exercise. It all ended well. But of course, you can imagine on a windy and choppy day, that would have been a very different story also for the boat owner, just to keep control of his vessel whilst they were waiting for us. So it can happen to anybody. Maintenance on the water is much more intense than on the dry. As I'm sure you've all understood, BOAT stands for Break Another 1,000, which is exactly what it is. You need to keep pouring money into your vessel and time into your vessel to maintain it, and to make sure that you don't run into the kind of embarrassing situations that we're seeing here. The embarrassment can grow quickly, of course, if you're fundamentally unprepared, which is what we run into quite a bit too. And generally speaking, these are the worst situations where people are on the water who really should not be there. So this is why I call this entirely preventable. So these are just silly situations, and especially, of course, in impaired drivers. And that's where you run into this kind of scenarios where you find vessels which, by some miracle in this particular case, is still upright, but it's sitting in the middle of a breakwater. And you really wonder, how on earth did this guy get here? And if you look at it from the other end, yeah, he drove up to the breakwater, which actually is in between the open ocean and his marina. So he was trying to get into his marina. I don't know if he was trying to fly over it or what he was intending to do, but clearly it didn't work out. The entrance to the marina, by the way, was about 100 meters away. So he was way off target. I suspect he was drunk. But this is, of course, entirely preventable. It was full daylight. How on earth do you do something like this? So it can end much more badly, like in this particular case. Thankfully, nobody drowned here, but as you can see, the vessel is not doing very well. And again, if you look, this was a perfectly calm day, but it only takes the wake of another vessel to destabilize your vessel if you're driving at the wrong speed, or if you're not balanced properly, if your crew is not sitting in the right place. So these are just kind of rookie mistakes or silly mistakes that people make. Boating, you need to really know what you're doing. So in other words, be prepared. So let's talk about prevention a little bit. The goal is, again, to keep us away. I mean, we're very friendly people, but we really don't want to impose on you. So keep us away as much as you can. First of all, of course, by following the law, and that is you need to have your pleasure operator card. You can find them at the Power Squadron, and there's quite a few other commercial operators who offer the course. Power Squadron actually has a nice little virtual booth, and you can read up there on the whole program. And that will teach you largely, the navigation rules, the rules of the road, basically. Lights, as I said, you really have to understand your lights, especially if you're going to go at night, and make sure yours work. That's very important too. Charts, you need to have them, read them, and understand them. Understanding is the key here. It's not necessarily easy to understand the charts. So make sure that you spend the time to really kind of dig through the charts and understand what all the little symbols mean. It takes a bit of time. Electronic charts are no different. You still have to understand them. Maintain your boat. As I said, this again sounds trivial, but boats degrade much more quickly than anything on land, just because of the marine environment. Salt water is very aggressive. Boats tend to be used sporadically, so they sit unattended for months at a time, especially now in winter. And with that, especially in April, May, we get a lot of calls of broken down vessels just because maintenance wasn't done. The owner comes back after the winter, starts the engine and shoots out of the marina, and 2 miles later, the engine dies, maybe because the fuel has gone bad, maybe because there's growth in diesel, maybe because the hose just, cracked because it dried out. So there's many reasons by which boats will fail on you. Most of the time it's benign and, it's just a tow home. But it can end very badly too, of course, if you happen to be close to shore and you get blown onto shore or whatever not. And fuel, make sure you have enough fuel with you. Again, sounds silly, but it happens all the time. And then actually do safety drills. And this is especially true for the more critical items like a man overboard, which can be traumatic at the best of times for whoever is fallen off a ship. And especially if you're a sailboat, of course, it can be very difficult to actually execute a man overboard maneuver if your sail's up. So you really have to train for this. And I'd say that it's also good every once in a while to invert the roles and for you as a driver to be in the water, because seeing a vessel, even a small vessel, come at you from the water is extremely scary most of the time, just because of the mass of it and the speed. So, kind of inverting the roles and having you in the water will teach you that you really have to be very good at this maneuver in order not to scare and possibly hit the person in the water. So safety drills are key. MOB is an obvious one, but equally it's important for most, if not all people on board to understand where all the safety gear is and possibly how to operate the vessel in case you become incapacitated, and certainly how to place a mayday call if need be, and we'll come to that in a second. So that's all part of safety drills, and just spend some time. It doesn't have to be tedious. It can actually be quite fun. If you're going to jump in the water, pick a nice day, but it is definitely a good exercise. And then, of course, if you're going to drink, then make sure you have a designated driver to take the boat home. Don't drink and drive. We've seen many disasters happen because of that. So safety gear, a lot of it is mandatory. So you really have to understand what you need on board. And most of the stuff that is mandatory is mandatory for good reason. And that is, it's part of the lessons learned in a way that is, this stuff is really going to save your life. Easy way to figure out what you need is to read the Safe Boating Guide, which is available as a PDF online, and is also available from the virtual booth of Transport Canada at the show. So you can look it up there. It's freely downloadable. And it'll effectively tell you primarily that, of course, you need PFDs or life vests for everybody on board. That makes total sense. And wear them, of course, otherwise they're useless. You need a signaling device, both for ongoing use, but of course, especially in case of danger or in case of distress. So in other words, you need flares. And again, flares are something that people, irritates people most of the time because they have a 4-year life span. So whenever you have to replace them every 4 years, they're expensive. You can't dispose of them. It's complicated, but they're great insurance. So make sure you have your flares and also make sure you know how to use them. In other words, don't shoot them off as soon as you're in trouble. Shoot them off when somebody is in sight and therefore will potentially see your flare and actually do something about it. It's a bit of a shame to shoot off all your flares into a void and then to discover that when you really need them because a vessel is looking for you and cannot find you, that you have no flares left. A heaving line to grab people, bring them back on board. A reboarding device, in effect a ladder, so that people can climb back on board more easily, which otherwise can be extremely difficult. A bailer, just in case you're taking on some water. An anchor to effectively stop your boat, of course, especially if you're broken down and you're drifting. An anchor might save your life. A fire extinguisher, again, one of those things which is mandatory and has an expiry in the sense that it has to be recertified every year. So there's a bit of an expense there and a bit of a hassle, but you really need to do it because there's nothing worse than having a fire on a boat. You're sitting in the middle of the water, but you can't do anything about it. So fire extinguishers are key. First aid, of course, makes sense. And then a VHF radio. This is something where we see less and less people having VHF radios. People think that their cell phone is going to save the day, and it might. But a VHF radio, of course, is A, much more reliable, B, generally speaking, waterproof, and also it communicates with everybody within reach, so typically 25 nautical miles. So the chances of, especially a distress signal being picked up off the radio is much higher than if you're desperately trying to get your phone to work. And by the way, it will die on you the exact moment that you need it most. So VHF radio, buy one. It's $100. It's not exactly the end of the world, and it can save your life. So therefore, in an emergency, be prepared. First of all, when you place an emergency call, this again sounds silly, but it happens all the time. People don't listen. They're either in such a panic or they're so embarrassed with themselves or whatever, they do not listen to the advice that Coast Guard is giving them over the radio, and then that the rescue crew is giving them when we arrive on site. Now, anything that we tell you, generally speaking, again, comes from lessons learned. So listen and follow the advice. It sounds silly, but as I say, it happens all the time. People just do not listen. And then try to mitigate. Before we arrive and when we're on scene, try to de-escalate the situation, basically. And it can be as simple as, try to plug a hole in your vessel before the water gets too high. Try to figure out if, you can unplug your outboard if that's dying. So essentially try to turn an emergency into a simple problem, a problem into a simple issue, and an issue just into a nuisance. And the more you can do yourself, the better off you are, because it will take a little while for rescue to arrive most of the time. So if you can de-escalate during that time, that's perfect. So you need to be prepared to look after yourself, at least for a little while. And that little while could be anywhere from a few minutes to half an hour, and in really bad weather, it could be hours before we actually find you. So you need to be prepared to wait that long for help to be on site. So as I said, calling for help, do it early. So in other words, don't wait for a situation to turn into a disaster before you pick up the radio or your phone and call for help. All of us in first responders and search and rescue would much rather have you call early and then call us again to say problem solved, you can turn around. That's fine. We're used to that. On the other hand, if the situation is getting out of hand and you're calling us then, it might be too late, or at least the situation is going to get very hairy. So just, first thing you do, call for help. Even if you feel that you can handle the situation yourself, if it's a serious issue, just call for help. We can always cancel the call later. There's no charge for that. As I said, you can call by radio, of course. That's the preferred way of calling, and I'm sure you all know that's channel 16, which is your distress and hailing channel. So don't chat on 16, only use it for hailing and for distress. You can also, if you want to use the phone, as you can use the phone, you can call the Joint Rescue Coordination Center directly. So that's the 800 number right there. And sometimes, not always, depending on your operator or your cell phone company, star 16 or #727 might also work. So that's a shortcut to get through to JRCC, but don't rely on it. I would primarily rely on my VHF, and then if that doesn't work, on the full number of JRCC. Either way, you should know what to say when you are in communication with the dispatcher. So it's a bit like calling 911. Stay calm and think it over before you start talking. Try to get this information ready. First of all, why are you calling? Is it a mayday? So in other words, is there immediate danger? Or is it just a pan, which means that you need help, but nobody's going to die? You need the boat name and as much of a description as you can give us, because all boats are white, generally speaking, which doesn't help. So the better description, brand, size, color of sails, if you have sails, if there's a stripe on them, all that helps. Your approximate location, ideally, of course, GPS coordinates. If that doesn't work, what do you see? Where are you? Where do you think you are? At night, again, this could be difficult. How many people are on board? And is there any health or medical issues? And then what's the nature of the problem that you need help with? And with all that being said, we know, what is going to await us, and therefore who we should send. Possibly we need specialized people, specialized equipment. The more we know, the better we'll be prepared to help you. And then take action whilst you're waiting for us. If the situation gets out of hand, and of course that's especially with issues around fire or leaks, try to solve it, or at least try to intervene without putting yourself at danger, of course. So if putting out a fire would be too dangerous, don't even try. Try to isolate the area in which the fire is. Try to pull all your people away from it. Same thing with a leak. If you can plug it at least slightly or half, that's great. If it's too dangerous, don't even try. In those cases, prepare to abandon ship. And if you're going to abandon ship, clearly the important part is take all the important stuff with you. So needless to say, flotation. So in other words, your life vest or your PFDs. Signaling, so take your flares with you because they come in handy later. And the ability to communicate. And again, a waterproof VHF, portable VHF would be the best in this particular case. And stay as close, if not on the boat, because the boat is much easier to spot than you in the water. So if we're going to be looking, likely we'll see the boat first, hopefully. And consequently, if you're on the boat or close to the boat, that makes it much easier for us. And I say on the boat because the boat, as long as it still floats, even if it's half full of water, will give you some flotation too. So better stay on a boat that is half floating than treading water and getting cold. So stay as close, if not on the boat, and just wait for help. If it becomes too dangerous, of course, abandon ship. When you call for help, effectively, somebody's going to come, but as I said, it'll take a while. It could take anywhere from a few minutes, if you're lucky, to, as I said, half an hour, which would be typical, to maybe much longer than that if we have a hard time finding you. We have many resources we can send your way. Coast Guard has its own vessels, of course, and the hovercraft, which many of you have seen, I'm sure. They have a few helicopters too. RCMSAR, we have, I think, somewhere close to 60 vessels on the coast. RCAF can send helicopters and even planes from Comox. And of course, as I'm sure you know, the law of the sea says that any other vessel on the water is obliged to render assistance. So, there is this wonderful principle on the ocean that we all help each other, but it's law. So don't ignore it. And especially, of course, if Coast Guard is putting out a call saying any vessel in the area, please assist, or please kind of report back, do so. I know it's a nuisance, it might delay you, but you might be saving a life. So, follow the law and just common sense and help out. So what do we deal with? Again, we never quite know, right? When we leave the station for a call, if we're lucky, we know exactly what the problem is. But even then, you don't know how it's going to unfold. It could be a very simple tow. Could be something more crazy, like here in very heavy seas, this vessel broken loose and is getting extremely close to shore there. Not a comfortable position to be in, and not easy for us to pull it off there neither. It could be a medical evacuation. It could be a big problem. That doesn't happen too often, thankfully. It could be just picking people off, hikers, or just helping Landstar with people stuck on shore with no access to the road system. It could be, in this case, it was a simulation, but as you can see, it's a life raft that actually was dropped from a helicopter. So any kind of situation can happen. Divers, we have a lot of diver issues in the Horseshoe Bay area where I operate. And here you go for another helicopter evacuation. So we deal with a bit of everything, which makes it very interesting, but also, of course, quite challenging at times. So to deal with all that, what do we use? Well, we have a fleet, as I said, of about 60 vessels. This is one of the bigger vessels. They're all driven and operated and maintained by volunteers at RCMSAR. This is what we call our Type 2. It's about 11 meters, as you can see, and it's actually a jet boat. So it actually has water jets, big diesel engines driving water jets. It can operate pretty much in all weather. It is rollover capable, so it'll come back upright by itself if it gets rolled by a big wave. It can go about 40 knots, and that's true in pretty much any weather, which can be quite interesting, I can tell you. We have room for a couple of stretchers inside. We can take on a fair number of victims. We also have a crane, basically, that we can attach to the front of the boat if we have to take victims, and especially in stretchers, off the beach or off the rocks. So it's a pretty versatile platform, and it serves us very, very well. Very robust vessels, and built in BC, in Sydney by Titan. We carry a lot of equipment, as you would expect, because, again, we deal with a bit of everything. So if you look here, we have, of course, first aid kits, lots of blankets. We have electronic beacons that actually help us find vessels by calculating drift. We have searchlights. We have grapple hooks to grab especially vessels on fire and to pull them out of marinas. We have dewatering pumps, etc., etc. You name it, we have it. So it also means that we train a lot, of course, because you actually have to know how to operate all this equipment, and in very difficult conditions at times. So that brings us to our crew and to the wonderful people that volunteer for us. As I said, we have about 1,000 volunteers. All of us are kind of very thoroughly trained, but for all of us, it's a secondary activity. So in other words, we have day lives and day jobs, and this is our passion. This is our service to the community, basically, to help with search and rescue. So we train. We have, of course, our procedures, manuals, etc., and we're very rigorous about following that, because safety. Safety is, of course, a very important element, even more so for us than for the occasional boater, because per definition, we're going to be in more trouble than most because of the situations in which we have to operate. So safety is key. It's a matter of arriving alive and getting home safe. One of our coxswains always says, the goal is to return to base with equal or larger number of people on board than when we departed. That sounds about right. Vessel emergencies, of course, we train a lot for that. Our own vessel could have emergencies, especially when we operate very close to shore, as you saw before. It could easily hit something. We also often operate close to vessels that are breaking apart. So there's a lot of flotsam in the water, which can clog our jets. So there's many reasons why our vessel could be in trouble. So we train for all that. We train, of course, for the typical issues that you might encounter too, person overboard being one. In our case, again, much higher probability of this happening because we are often transferring people between vessels in heavy seas, etc. So the chance of somebody falling overboard is relatively high, although it happens, thankfully, very occasionally only. So personal safety is, of course, number one. Everybody has to look after themselves, after their gear. We train a lot about that, and we're also very peculiar about the way that we maintain our equipment and our personal gear because we rely on that to save our lives, literally. We train a lot. Again, here they're training with his diver. We train first to search, though. Before we can rescue, we have to find. And for that, we have to search. And as I said, that's not necessarily easy. Contrary to on land, where you have 911, which can spot exactly where a call came from, or where you can just give your address, that is not necessarily true on the water. So very often we get very sketchy information as to where the incident is, and we have to search, and that can take hours. So it requires very good navigation skills, communication skills amongst the crew, but also with other vessels. Often we will search with multiple vessels. We use very specific search patterns, so there is science behind searching. It doesn't happen just randomly, believe me. There's quite a science there, and of course we have to be trained in that. And then in rescue, which of course includes first aid, as you would expect, but also a lot of more mechanical and technical issues, like how do you dewater a boat? How do you refloat a boat potentially? How do you operate close to shore? And in particular cases, how do you operate onshore or close, so close to shore that you're actually hitting shore to extract people from shore or from a beach or whatever? It can be very, very tricky, especially in heavy weather. So the rescue techniques are also quite unique and quite specialized, and they take a lot of time. Typically, therefore, every one of our crews trains pretty much every week. If you want to learn more, and if this all has kind of triggered your interest, then visit our booth, our virtual booth this year, sadly enough. So there you can actually take a virtual tour of a Type 2. Normally we would have brought a boat to the in-person boat show, but it doesn't exist. We've used interesting software to actually make a virtual boat tour, and you can actually tour by yourself and read up on everything that we have on board. There's also a fair bunch of videos and some brochures and information. So you can find all that at our booth. You can, of course, visit our website, rcmsar.com. And if you want to join one of our stations, you'll find on our virtual booth, you'll find leaflets with information on what the minimum requirements are and how to go about it. And we're always looking for volunteers, of course, especially experienced boaters. They're in high demand. And or if you wish, because you can do both if you want, you can donate, of course. As I said, we rely quite heavily on the community to donate. A vessel like the one you see on screen here is presumably in the order of $500,000. The bigger vessels can easily wind up costing you $1 million when they're fully equipped and with a bit of maintenance in there. So we're talking big money to do rescue in a professional way. And therefore, donations are key to us. We really rely on that quite heavily to keep our stations going. And generally speaking, the public is extremely generous and supports us very, very kindly. But first and foremost, I hope that you will be safe on the water and that you'll enjoy the coming season, and that your boat will serve you well in these challenging times, and that will give you the opportunity to kind of find a bit of joy in these interesting times. So with that, I am going to turn over to Maureen to see if there's any questions for me today.
Okay, thanks, Boudewijn. Please add your questions, if you have them, to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So our first question is from Patrick. Is shortwave radio still useful? Do you guys monitor it?
So those are two different questions. So we do not monitor that. We only monitor VHF. This being said, that is just because we use our radios primarily to communicate with Coast Guard, with marine traffic, and with the Coast Guard effectively dispatcher, which directs us to the incident. So we use specific channels for that. Of course, we also monitor channel 16, and we communicate with other vessels like any vessel would do. But we primarily use VHF as a way to communicate with our land dispatcher, if you wish. So shortwave is not used in that context. Now, shortwave might be used in other contexts, of course, in some agencies still use it. Other in the marine environment, it is used sometimes too. But for us, as a tool to communicate, either to monitor what's going on in the water or to communicate amongst ourselves, the answer is no.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Robert. Is there an age limit for volunteers?
Yes, there is. I think the official age limit, Rolf, who's in the background, might correct me here. I think it's 70 years, 70, not 17. So that's the upper limit. The lower limit is 18, 18. There is a few stations that have a what we call a junior program where you can actually join earlier, and then you're effectively not a full crew member, but you're in training. And you can actually kind of be assigned to a crew, and you'll follow as an extra member if you wish. All vessels have a minimum crew count, so a junior would not count. That would be an extra member. But that's a pretty wide bracket. Our experience is that we have a lot of relatively young people, so literally 18, 20, who join because they want to build up experience. Then very often they will move on to police, Coast Guard, or just anything else in life, but it's a phenomenal experience for them. And then we, generally speaking, have a window where people are too busy, so when you're a young parent, unfortunately, generally speaking, you're a bit too busy to go and play on boats. And then we have, in the 50s and the 60s, we have a lot of experienced boaters who come back and, like myself, who then kind of volunteer for another 20 years or so before they become so old that it's not really wise anymore. We have fitness requirements and tests, so there is a time at which anyhow your body will tell you that the game's over.
Okay, thank you. Richard is asking, what are examples of maydays that were issued and then quickly canceled?
Oh, well, I mean, the typical one is smoke. So if I'm on a vessel and all of a sudden I see smoke coming out of the engine room, I'm going to jump on my radio and I'm going to call a mayday, because that is bad, or could be very bad, right? And I don't know yet, but I'd rather call first. And then I'm going to go and investigate. And it might be something very simple, right? It might literally be, a electrical problem, which I can solve by literally switching off a battery. And of course, I might still need help, but it's not really a mayday anymore, because now it's just, the fact that I lost my battery, but nothing's burning. That would be a very classic example. We have quite a few of those. Same thing is water. If at some point all of a sudden somebody goes down under in your vessel and discovers water in the bottom of the boat, they might jump to the conclusion that, oh my God, there's a leak. Whereas actually that water might have just accumulated over a few hours, and might even be rainwater for all we know, but it hadn't been noticed before. So again, people might jump to the conclusion, oh my God, I'm sinking. And then upon further investigation, it turns out that the water is not rising at all. And actually, you just need a bucket and problem solved. But, I'd rather call it in, because if I am sinking, and if I need 15 or 20 minutes before rescue arrives, that's a long time to wait whilst your boat is sinking. So I'm going to call it right away. So those will be two classic ones.
Okay, so at what age does insurance coverage end? Don't think it is 70.
It's actually, if I remember well, there's two layers for that. Ralph, are you online? Can you remember me this? I think 60 is the first bracket, and then 70 is the ultimate, right?
Yeah, so at 70, the insurance coverage changes. It doesn't mean that you cannot continue to be an active volunteer, an active member, based on still having to meet the standards for participating.
Yeah, we should also say that crewing is one thing, but RCMSAR, of course, needs many other people in other capacities. So, and especially for people that are getting a bit older, maintenance is a classic example. Some very, very capable people in their 70s are perfectly capable of maintaining a vessel. They might not want to take the rough rides on the vessel during rescue calls, but they can be of extreme value in helping us with maintaining the vessels. Fundraising is another one which comes to mind. Training. Just training people on shoreside, so navigation skills and stuff like that. So there is a lot of our members who are not active crew anymore, but they're actually very valuable and very useful to the organization.
great. Now, question from Richard. How long after a Mayday should you shoot off a flare?
I don't think it's how long. It is, what is the purpose of the flare? The flare is, of course, to make your presence known. So there's really two reasons to shoot off a flare in my mind, and other people might have other creative ideas. The first one is just because you have no way of communicating with the outside world. So now you're shooting off a flare on the hope that somebody will see that flare and call it in. So in other words, and we do have that every once in a while, like, you'll have, especially for us here on Howe Sound, my station, Horseshoe Bay, is in Howe Sound. The highway to Whistler follows Howe Sound, and from the road you can see a lot of Howe Sound. So every once in a while we'll get a call from a car driver, saying, I think I just saw a flare being shot off, at Britannia Beach in Howe Sound. And that will be transferred by 911 to Coast Guard, who will then call us and we'll go and investigate. So that would be a case in which, as a vessel driver, you have no way of communicating, you have no radio, no cell phone, or nothing works. And the only way of making yourself known is to shoot off a flare to effectively declare I'm in danger, right? So that's number one. Of course, it's a bit of a crapshoot because you don't know if anybody is seeing your flare or is noticing your flare. So, it's a bit of a gamble. The second reason is for us to find you. So if we are getting closer, and possibly even you can see us, but we cannot see you, or we cannot make out which vessel is the vessel in distress. Like, think again of fireworks nights where you have hundreds of vessels on the water, and if you are calling in a mayday, and we're trying to find you, but we literally have hundreds of vessels on the water, it can take us a while to figure out which one is the one that we're actually aiming for. So there, a flare can literally pinpoint the vessel in distress. So in other words, when you see help coming, and you kind of suspect or might even come to the conclusion that we cannot easily find you, then shooting a flare or using a handheld a flare or even smoke screen in daylight can be a very useful way, of course, of narrowing down the search very quickly. But as I said, that second scenario you should only do when you're pretty sure that somebody's seeing you, because your flares are in limited supply, right? Like if you're a small vessel today, if you read the regulations carefully, if you're under 6 meters, if I remember well, you only need 3. If you have a two-way communication system on board, so in other words, if you have a cell phone or a radio on board, you only need 3 flares. That's not much. So I would say buy 6, which used to be the old rule, but even then, you can run out pretty quickly. So use them sparingly, use them strategically.
Okay, great. Next question from Paul. I understand as a volunteer that you have to be able to reach the station within 15 minutes of a call out. Is there any leeway in that rule, say 20 or 25 minutes?
Well, my answer is no. and I base that on what happens at our station. Our station, we're 100% religious. It is 15 minutes non-negotiable, to the point where when you sign up, our station leader will literally go into Google, type in your address, and look at what Google says as far as what's the legal time at a legal driving speed that it would take you to get to the station. If it's over 15 minutes, it's thanks, but no thanks, we cannot use you. So that's the starting point. The same is true, therefore, if you're on call, because of course we take turns to be on call. If you're on call, don't go shopping. Or if you go shopping, you have to be still within your 15-minute radius, because we really want you at that boat. And there's a good reason for that. I mean, literally, as we've been talking about for the last hour, lives could be in danger. So we don't want to be delayed because our third or our fourth crew member is shopping for margaritas or for pizza and is therefore now 10 minutes late. So that's unacceptable. Like we just do not accept that. We have to be off the dock in 15 minutes. Now, some stations, just because of geography, it makes it difficult. Like, you just don't have the density of population to actually impose that limit. So there is some stations which are a bit more lenient in that regard, but that is really based then on the fact that they cannot practically impose the 15-minute limit. But for us in Horseshoe Bay, it's easy. We have enough volunteers within a generally speaking, a much closer radius. Like generally speaking, we're off the dock way before that.
Okay. Question from Alex. I am 65 and not likely to meet the fitness level criteria, but would you have any role for a nurse?
Oh, yes. So there is, the obvious answer to that is first aid training. So, of course, we all have our basic first aid. We have to have our basic first aid certification. Quite a few of us also have first responder certifications, so higher certifications. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, it's actually mostly fortunately, but we don't use our first aid training much because there's only very few events in which you really, really need it. Consequently, it's a bit rusty. So for us, the ability to actually kind of systematically train again and again and again and go through exercises in first aid is crucial. We do it literally, as I said, every week or every few weeks at our station. And that means that somebody has to take the lead. And of course, you want somebody who's competent. So that would be a great start.
Okay, there's just a few minutes left. If anyone does have a question, please pop it in the Q&A box. Boudewijn, I just wanted to mention that Gordon Miller says, I worked with you at CREO. Nice to see you again.
I saw that. I didn't respond to him because I was kind of busy talking here, but I saw the message.
Okay. And then I don't know if you saw this one from Alistair. There are a limited number of hard copies of Safe Boating Guide available. And then he gives the email for how you can contact the office there.
Yes, indeed. It's a very useful publication. Also, make sure you get a recent copy because the rules do change. And with that, of course, the advice as to how to operate the vessel, in particular, whether you need on board as far as minimum safety gear. It does change over time, sometimes in your favor, sometimes it becomes a bit harsher, but it is generally speaking based on good, on lessons learned and experience. So it is really a very useful publication. It's a starting point. It's not going to tell you everything, but it's certainly something that you want to have with you. On my private sailboats, I always have my little Safe Boating Guide with me. It sounds silly. You'd think that I would know it by heart by now, but there's always, every once in a while, you go like, how does that work already again? Or what's the rule again? And you just quickly go and look it up.
Okay, we have a question here from Jamie. What are the standard gear clothing requirements when on the vessel? Okay,
so again, that's one of those issues which is interesting because different schools of thought are available there. I assume that we're talking about rescue crews as opposed to everybody else. Boaters can do whatever they want. But for a rescue crew, in our case, of course, we get issued our work vest. So basically, that's a PFD, which comes equipped with all the toys and whistles. So basically, it has a strobe light, it has a knife, it has scissors, etc., etc. So all that is part of your standard gear, which gets issued to you. If you're operating a fast open vessel like the one on screen, as you'll see, everybody has a helmet on. So we operate with helmets in that vessel because it's pretty rough and you could literally hit your head pretty quickly. So those are two standard safety devices that would come from the station, if you wish. Everything else is your problem. So in other words, what you put under those layers is yours. Typically, we insist, actually for us, it's mandatory. You have to have long pants. So some rescue crews, especially in warmer countries, operate in shorts. We do not allow that because the risk of injury to your legs is too high in our meanings or in our thinking. So basically, long pants. And of course, other than that, it's common sense, right? So for instance, we all know that cotton gets cold if it's wet, so we tend to operate a lot with more the synthetic fibers. Most stations do issue vests like Gore-Tex vests, as you can see the crew on screen. They all have the same vests, so that's typically what we go for. A lot of us also have pretty good shoes, of course, watertight. Many of us use steel-toed shoes. Just because, again, lessons learned, right? Like you get something dropped on your shoe that hurts, so better have a steel toe, but it's not mandatory. So it's you have to feel comfortable too. It's a pretty physical and kind of activity. You have to be pretty agile. So you shouldn't overdress. You have to dress for the circumstances, and you have to have your minimum safety gear with you, of course, for sure.
Okay, Boudewijn, I think that's it for the questions. Did you want to close out before?
Well, as I said, feel free to come and visit us at our virtual booth or at any of our stations. You're more than welcome. We're always happy to welcome visitors and show them around. You might also know that many of our stations offer courtesy safety checks. So if you want your vessel to be checked for conformance to everything that we discussed today, and just to get some good advice on how to operate your vessel, you can book safety checks with many of our stations. That's complimentary. It takes maybe half hour, maybe an hour, depending on the size of the boat, and can be a good learning experience for everybody. So feel free to do that. If you want to join us again as a rescue tech, please do. It's a lot of fun. I've been doing it for over 10 years, and sometimes it's a bit scary, but generally speaking, it's really interesting and really useful work. And as I said, don't forget, if you can, to donate. You'll find, again, information on donations on our website, because we need the money, sadly enough. It's an expensive game. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Boudewijn. And thank you for joining us today. We are interested in your feedback, either on this seminar or if you have ideas on topics that you would like us to cover in the future. Please click on the evaluation tab located just above the seminar description and complete the form. After the show, all attendees will also receive a post-show survey. Be sure to check out all of the features at the Vancouver International Boat Show Virtual. If you have a question, check out our info booth, and have a great day at the boat show.
Oh yeah, the season starts.